Is Dr. Shibalo in the meeting? I can't see him on the list here, unless he use another devices. Okay. Brother Kina? Okay, colleagues. Yeah, no, the first speaker on our program, we are having Dr. Mokoena. And I don't know, Dr. Mokoena, she's already in the meeting. If yes, can you please just shout that I can recognize you?
I'm here.
Which device that I use? Let me check. I just want to try to check. Oh, is that device of you? Where is it now? Dr. Mokoena, can you speak with me?
I am here. I'm using my staff number.
Okay, okay, thank you very much. Now I can recognize it now. Okay. In our program, colleagues, we are having Dr. Mokoena to be our first speaker. Doctor, welcome into our last contact session for the NTS. I'm now going to hand over to you to take us through your presentation. I've seen yesterday the rule, it was all the speakers must try to switch on their cameras so that the student can be able to see who are they engaging and who are presenting. So I don't have your credential with me. May you please introduce yourself while you are switching on your camera, and immediately after the introduction, then you can take us through your presentation.
Good morning. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
I'm not feeling well. But yeah, good morning. This is Dr. Mokoena from Maranatha, from the Faculty of Theology and Religion at the University of Pretoria. I'm in the Departments of Religion, Old Testament, and Hebrew Scriptures. I'm not feeling well, colleagues. I'd rather be sleeping. I got my first jab yesterday, so I'm going to be a bit tardy today. I'm not feeling my usual self, but I will just try to get through the presentation. So for the purpose of that, can I please switch off my camera? And can someone please assist me in uploading? I have a few notes on a PowerPoint presentation that I'd like to share.
You're welcome. You can switch off your cameras. We understand, Doctor, and thank you very much for making time to come, even if you are not feeling well. For that sacrifice, may the good Lord bless you. Thank you very much. We'll ask Gianni to upload the presentation. Did you email your presentation, Doctor?
No, I didn't, but I have it somewhere here. Let me just.
Gianni,
I can open it from my side, most.
Yes, if you get the co-host, let me check.
Hello.
With Gianni.
I don't know, like the feedback at the mic, yeah.
Sorry, you are able now.
Can I share it?
Yes. Dr. Mokoena? Oh yeah. You now have the rights to share. I can see your screen.
Okay. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I was told to do a Bible study, so I'm not really sure, but fortunately for me, the scripture that I was given, I had presented a paper on this scripture, I think in 2018, at the Old Testament Annual Society meeting. And the scripture is about the rape of Dinah in Genesis 34, 1-31. And the contents of that specific presentation, I wanted to look at what I borrow from, a term I borrow from the Afro-pessimism school of thought in critical race theory, what they call the libidinal economy. So I wanted to look at the corporeality, the poetics of the flesh of women, and how we can create a corpus around that, and how we theorize, how we excavate hidden jewels in this epidemic that we're dealing with. But the focus for today, I think it is going to be primarily about violence, generic violence. And to start off, I would like us to just have a few demarcations and elucidations on violence as we know it. And I realized that in the program, it was written that I'm going to talk about gender-based violence. And already by reading that, I could theorize around what I wanted to talk about. Because we have a way of speaking about violence in umbrella terms or blanket terms. And gender-based violence is not an umbrella or blanket term for general violent acts. And it's for that reason I would want us to go through the specific violent acts that exist, because I believe that without a proper diagnosis, then we cannot properly cure. So to kickstart, I want to talk about gender-based violence. And normally when we hear gender-based violence, either in the news or on television or wherever, we think that it's just violence based on gender. But then if you understand feminist literary critical theory, you will know that there is a stark difference between gender and sex. So gender does not encompass sex, and sex does not encompass gender. So when we speak about gender-based violence, we speak about violence that is directed at peoples who have a certain gender identity, which is far removed from biological determination, or people who have a certain gender expression. So this can include gender hate crimes, for instance, feminine presenting queer persons, or masculine presenting queer persons, or gender non-conforming people. And gender-based violence at its very core is a violation of human rights, because you are coming for the person who they identify as, and that is their whole humanity. There is nothing we can do about that. So that is gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is it can go across all genders. It is not specific to women. And then we have violence against women. Violence against women is women-specific, as it says, it's self-explanatory. And violence against women has misogynistic undertones. So it can happen to a woman, and the violence can be inflicted by someone other than a partner. So this includes the violence that women encounter every day. When you're walking down the streets, you are catcalled, you are threatened, there is threatening behavior towards you, you are shoved around, and all of these acts can result in injury or death. And normally, what informs this kind of behavior is patriarchal privilege and unequal distributions of power, and the fact that people cannot be held culpable for such acts. Men commit these acts of violence against women specifically because they know that they can get away with it. Now that is violence that is specific against women. And then we have domestic violence. Domestic violence can happen in a home setting, and it affects everyone irrespective of their gender identity, bodily ability, age, or sex. So violence such as corporal punishment, violence directed against the elderly, violence directed against the young, violence directed against those who cannot fully function in their body, disabled peoples, queer peoples, gender non-conforming peoples, heterosexual cisgender men and women. intimate partner violence. And if this kind of violence is fashioned in a relationship context and includes all genders, it is fashioned through psychological, verbal, sexual, emotional, and financial abuse of the spouse or partner. And people commit this kind of violence because they take advantage of the leverage that has been extended to them in you, and you can get away with it. And then lastly, we have teen dating violence. Teen dating violence is a violence that is gender, age specific, dating of significant age difference. And it's fashioned in a manner of psychological aggression, grooming, rape, and repeated acts of cause and effects. Because you come as a significantly older person, as a significantly older woman, or as a significantly older man, and you express your interests towards a significantly younger person. And that, you know, like people say that there's no such thing as non-consensual sex and consensual sex. There's consensual sex and rape. So we cannot say that there is, you know, dating younger people and pedophilia. There's no contrast between the two. It's one. And the basis of that is rape, because younger people of non-consenting age cannot reason beyond that capacity. So I wanted us to demarcate all of these forms of violence before we can even move further, to understand that gender-based violence is not a blanket or umbrella term for violent acts. And like the African-American scholar, Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality, I'm very skeptical of using words like coined the term, but for the interest of research, we will credit her for that and say that she introduced the concept intersectionality to us. And she taught us that if we are not able to properly diagnose, then the most vulnerable people in society will fall through the cracks. And this is why men-on-men violence is ignored, queer-on-queer violence is ignored, cisgender heterosexual violence is the one that is illuminated in society, because we believe that everything is gender-based violence, which is not. And this is why we cannot account for other forms of violence, because we are not properly informed to deal with them, how to identify them, and how to deal with them. And that is where I will halt it for today. And to move on to now the biblical exposition of Genesis 34, 1 to 34. I want to particularly qualify this term, this verse, as violence against women. And when you read the text, when you do your historical critical analysis of the text, you will realize that it was violence that was fashioned systematically and ideologically. These two cultures, because violence is enabled by a certain culture. But also now to go into an ancient society like ancient Israel and to speak of systematic and ideologically enabled violent cultures can be anachronistic. It means that we are taking modern prisms of reading text and applying them into ancient context, and it often doesn't work. So we need a proper exposition of the text. So when we read Genesis 34, 1 to 34, we read about the rape of Dinah. The interesting part there is that when you see the brothers' responses to this alleged crime, then you will understand why systematic violence is beneficial to patriarchy. Then you will understand why violence against women is propagated in such a manner that women become disposable and fungible objects. And this is why when I wrote this paper, I was talking about the libidinal economy. It's an invisible economy where women's fears are exchanged for their anxieties, and men's privilege functions in that economy as the currency. Another thing we notice from Genesis 34, 1 to 34 is that In itself, that violent act tells us about the legacy of biblical violence. So it is not far removed from the greater experience of violence as we have it, on violence as we view it and as we encounter it. And this violence, as we see it in the bigger picture, is culturally, ideologically, and theologically sustained and encouraged. So the rape of Diana was possible because already there's a culture that enables this greater violence. And this is why her pain was exchanged for the sustainment of a monarchy. And also when you now want to go into the intricacies, me and a colleague of mine, Professor Ndikom Chiselwa, we wrote a paper about anthropomorphism in Old Testament. And we speak about how this masculine presenting and violent God is the same culture that enables even ideologies like monotheism, where we can easily other, easily demarcate, and easily remove ourselves. So that is also at the crux of why the legacy of biblical violence exists. And of course, I teach Semitic languages, so I had to go to the Hebrew and realize that there is no English equivalent for the word rape in Hebrew. It's to take possession of. Because women are counted amongst cows and sheep and all other properties. So you are taking possession of. And this is why I'm saying it is going to be very anachronistic to speak about systematic violence in ancient Israel, when for them it was business as usual. They didn't recognize the system as we see it today. And then what happens further in the narrative is that we see Diana now being turned into a disposable and fungible object, and at the expense of sustaining the monarchy. So that's why I speak of the libidinal economy, because now it turns into a transactional history. Her silence will buy the monarchy. Ignoring the fact that this woman was raped, this violence was inflicted on her body, is not really part of any program that we want to partake in. So what does this do? It justifies rape culture, and in turn, it turns rape into an epidemic. South Africa has a problem of rape, aptly so put by Professor Phumla Gola in the title of her book, Uguti, Rape is the South African Nightmare. We have an epidemic of rape. A woman is safer in Afghanistan with bombs dropping than she is in South Africa. The hell that is inflicted on women's bodies is sustaining the heaven, which is called patriarchy for men. But we should be very careful of not wanting to speak in compartments. We cannot compartmentalize violence because it doesn't exist in a single act, in a single vacuum. It is very interconnected. And this is why we should be able to link all of these things. And this is why, for that reason, I want to speak about how the bigger picture plays into the small narratives. What we also find here at the base of this narrative is interpretive traditions, biblical modes of reading. We have your source criticism, redaction criticism, ideological criticism, and form criticism. And all of these as well help in the formation of sanitizing these very violent biblical narratives and giving us a story that makes it look like this was just business as usual. It gives violence an opportunity to be cunning. It gives men the opportunity not to be held culpable. It gaslights women. And then this is why people believe that rape cannot happen in intimate relationships. I invited this man into my house. He was my brother. She was my mother's friend. And that is when we now begin to speak of issues of consent, bodily autonomy, and the withdrawal of consent at any time. And people falsely positioning themselves in society to lure and deceive. Can we mute our mics, colleagues? Can we continue? Are you done with your phone call?
Sister Teboko, please mute your mic.
So colleagues, when we speak about issues of consent, we speak about bodily autonomy because for a long time it has been theorized and arranged in society that women will not have agency. But now also, like I said before, if you remember in the previous slide, I said that the systematic violence that is now collapsing on Dinah's body, all these systems are now, collapsing on her body and they're manifesting in a violent form act of rape. And I said it was a legacy of biblical violence. In our current context, we also understand the historical continuity of Black women who are being barred reciprocity, recognition, and incorporation. So these violent acts are sustained by bigger cultures. And this is why Black women cannot drink from the same well as white women when it comes to feminism. Because white women may be on the police side of violence against Black women, but they are on the policing side of anti-Blackness. So they can agree with us when we sit in conferences that this is wrong. This violence fashioned against us is wrong. But when they go and dance on the yacht with their fellow white men, they leave us Black men and women in the cotton fields. And so white women assumed that the universal experience of rape was somehow indicative of a universal structure of subjugation. So they believe that, like I said, these small acts of violence are sustained by bigger cultures. So for white women, they assume that, the experience of rape fashioned against Black women or queer, gender non-conforming people of color is sustained by a greater violence of subjugation. So this is why even when we speak of feminism with white women, it becomes tricky because they benefit from imperialism, they benefit from colonialism, they benefit from greater violence fashioned against us. And this is why Black men and Black women should come and theorize together because we are all in the cotton fields. So most white feminists operate out of an assumption logic that imagines sexual violence as an effect of competing notions as to how symbolic orders are structured. For instance, by capital, according to Marxist feminists, or by patriarchy, according to feminists who deploy psychoanalysis. And then what is the ultimate implication now that we have realized all of this? Professor Maripwani wrote a very nice paper about, I think she was using Judges 19, and she spoke about the democratization of fear, which is a similar notion we find in Phumla Qola's book, South Africa, A Rape, a South African Nightmare, what she calls the Woman Fear Factory. So now that we have established all the facts, that these small acts of violence are perpetuated by a bigger culture, and they sustain the bigger project of violence that is there to subjugate. How does this function in our daily lives? It democratizes the fear of women. It creates what Phumla Qola calls a female fear factory. And as she says in her book, I'm going to quote her verbatim. Phumla Qola says that the fear factory is it's very theatrical as it is spectacular. By theatrical, I allude its exaggerated performance in front of an audience in terms that are immediately understood. It is spectacular in its reliance on visible, audible, and other recognizable cues to transmit fear and control. So what this means is that this violence plays out on a stage. It's very theoretical. Like Achille Mbembe says that power is very dramatic. It likes to play itself on a stage. Men will commit these acts of violence blatantly so, theatrically so, knowing that they will escape culpability because there's a culture that enables those violent acts. And what that does in turn is that it creates a fear factory where women's anxieties are stored there. Our fears are collected and stored there. You pass by a black man at night, even if it's just a family member you didn't recognize, already your instincts are up. He's going to rape me. He's going to do this to me. And it's not only between black men and women. Also, black men fear each other. And actually, black men kill each other more than they kill black women. We have a problem of violence in this country. We have a big problem of violence. And ultimately, what we want is to live in a non-violent society. And we should be able to have these conversations, curate these spaces where we properly and accurately diagnose what our problems are. So that, and I'm glad it happens in the space of a church context, because these conversations are not supposed to happen on the pews. We're supposed to take them to the pulpits. Should I begin to give practical examples of the violence we experience in churches, I'll finish tomorrow. But for the purpose of today, my message was simple. Let's decentralize, de-democratize this fear factory. Let's come together, curate a space for ourselves where we can equally, with no asymmetrical and unequal distributions of power, theorize about our world, how we can overcome this, and what we can learn from this narrative where a woman was raped, but her silence bought her brothers a monarchy. And for that, I thank you, Chairperson. I will leave that for today.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for the wonderful presentation. Brother Kina, is Kina the man? Kina?
Rudy.
May you please lead the discussion, because I'm going to present after the break. May you please lead the discussion and take it from here.
Thank you so much, Moruti. Thank you so
very
much. Dr. Lerato, monna ngwaneso Lerato. Ra leboha, Dr. Lerato, for a powerful and provoking presentation. Those are the duties of a scholar. When you're a scholar and when you present, or every time when you speak, you must provoke people's thought. It is normal to leave people bitter or thinking otherwise. Thank you so much, Dr. Lerato, for that presentation. Colleagues, for any comment or any questions, we have only 22 minutes to discuss and give a clear clarification for the previous discussion. Ke kopa matsoho, ke bona Katleho Mokoena is available. I'm going to ask you, Reverend Mokoena Katleho, just to give a comment on what Dr. Lerato Mokoena has said. And after Reverend Mokoena, I will have Hudisamang Situdu. Over to you.
No, thank you. Thank you, Kina. And thank you as well to Dr. Mokoena for a very powerful presentation. I think it has covered all bases of our South African context on violence, as well as biblical violence. And I also appreciate that she mentioned the word anachronism when especially dealing with the text, that we do not take our own context and basically place it on top of the biblical context. Now, my question is also based along those lines of saying, Dr. Mokoena, how do we consolidate all of this, especially the biblical context, when a woman especially a Black woman, reads the Old Testament and finds it with so much violence towards women, in a context whereby it was normalized, it was business as usual, as you were saying. So when a Black woman reads the Old Testament, how should they have the ability or have the tools of analysis in understanding the biblical context, especially the Old Testament, as well as, consolidating that? Because also in your presentation, you mentioned a violent God as well. In other words, a God that allowed that context to flourish, the culture that allowed that violence towards women to flourish. How do Black women specifically consolidate, a relationship with God in reading the Old Testament? Thank you.
Should I answer now?
Okay, we can maybe put JD two, then we're gonna respond.
Okay.
Yeah, that is Tutu.
Kia Leboga. Thank you so much, Brother Kia. Good morning, everyone. And good morning to you, Dr. Mokoena, and thanks for the good and powerful presentation. I thought when you were presenting, this was going to take some time, and but of course, so many things that came out, like thought-provoking and so forth. But one thing that I want to ask, Doctor, from what you have said, that gender-based violence is not like one blanket that can be used in every situation. It needs to be diagnosed. Where, on that point, where do we place the recent brutal killing of Mrs. Moloko that happened last week at the correctional service facilities, and then this one of the assassination of Mrs. Betty Diokoren? Where do we place that in the context of violence or gender-based violence? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those questions. I think just in the interest of, I will just put on my mic now so that it doesn't seem unfair, my video. To answer the first question from Reverend Mokoena, to consolidate means that we need to have equal footing, and I don't think we don't, because forces only consolidate where they're equal. And we don't, in the sense that Madipwane also, wrote extensively on this, about how we should recognize the gaps that exist between us and the ancient society. There are traditional gaps, there are religious gaps, there are ideological gaps. And this is why modes of reading like form criticism exist to aid us to be able to unearth. In feminist biblical interpretation, they call it the unearthing of androcentrism in biblical texts. And what that means is that we need to be able to do an ideological analysis to be able to separate the forces. We need to be able to see where this was just a religious agenda and this was just ancient society life for them. And then when you come as a Black woman and you want to read texts like, and it's funny enough because at the moment I'm actually finalizing an article on, I want to use Saidiya Hartman's concept of critical fabulation and how we access archives and how we make them relate to our everyday lives. And Saidiya says that we should be careful in how we read violent texts to make sure that in our narration, we don't commit further violent acts. So what should be done is that we should be able to excavate these stories, separate the everyday lives of the women from androcentrism. So for instance, I write a lot about Jezebel and Job's wife. And I always say that Jezebel was framed. She didn't do anything. Because if you do a historical analysis of the text, you will see even how it plays into, you know, the perception of Black women's sexuality. And going back into the Atlantic slave trade. So we should be able to have a method, a prism in which we attend to these biblical texts. And I think that's why I want to make it my lifelong mission, to make sure that we are able to excavate ourselves out of these, you know, violent narratives, but at the same time, not running away from the indignation that we want to go head on and face, because I don't believe that even those violent acts are just accidental stories in our daily lives. But to go further now into explaining the intrinsic value of violence will be another story, and that is quite extreme. But I hope I have managed to answer you. And just secondly, to go to the second question, I'm not sure, you said Mrs. I don't want to be presumptive and say that she was killed by her husband. You also mentioned correctional service. So can you please just provide clarity for me there? Was she attacked by the inmates, or she was attacked by her partner or her husband?
Okay, it is alleged that she was attacked by an inmate. Okay.
You see, the same way I want to quickly go to the second act that you mentioned, the assassination, and I'm so glad you put it aptly that it's an assassination, because clearly we live in a mafia state. And I think that is just corrupt acts of violence to gun down a whistleblower. And I think we have seen it happen even, you know, if luckily for us, history has no blank pages. And this, we cannot qualify it as a specific violent act against the woman. She was a whistleblower. It tells us that we live in a mafia state. It tells us that our government is corrupt. And it tells us that, you know, none of us are actually spared when it comes to that. And I think in terms of the first act, the fact that she was killed by inmates, then we need to go and interrogate the systematic violence that exists within the confines of prisons, and how that manifests, because I mean, they die on a daily, and both men and women. So I think also we should be able to, because violence cannot exist outside of institutions also. It is fashioned by certain institutions. So in certain instances, we need to go and interrogate institutional cultures, how they enable that kind of violence. What would make an inmate think that the life of a warder is so disposable? And also now, you know, prison reformation programs, I believe we have chaplains here. They can, you know, maybe elucidate for us better about how some people are just simply psychopaths. There's no, we can't always want to pathologize or theorize certain acts. And then, because sometimes that proximity can either protect or it can destroy. So we need to be careful how we approach those kind of violent descriptions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lerato. While we're still waiting for just 3 minutes, what can you please say about Japan Berteba? How would you explain David was a key, and David knew that Berteba was someone's wife, and he was told, David, that it's someone's wife. So did he use those powers or position as a king to do what he did to Bathsheba, or during Bathsheba? Can you just give your thought on that narrative?
Okay, thank you for that. The Bathsheba narrative is quite interesting as well. You know, Maripwani said in one conference, you know, although David took it to an extreme, but men like David actually exist. when you look at migrant labor, because Uriah was a soldier and he was most of the time away to war. And so, you know, someone had to take care of the home. And I get it, this is why Barry, before Ukena, how long is everything, before Ukena got to Morena, so that Morena, you know, he was taking care of your property for you. So Uriah was often away at war. And I think that is the reality of most women. You know, when migrant labor, you know, it kills these nuclear families that we try to build. But in the context of Bathsheba, I think David exercised, you know, absolute power as he would, any king would. Look at how, you know, Ahab killed Naboth for a piece of land when he's a king who rules over massive amounts of land. So I think in certain instances, it's just petty exercises of power, sometimes to test your own limits, but also I think in ancient societies, it's this thing, yeah, redeemer, this concept of a redeemer. Remember when Job said, my redeemer lives? In actual fact, he didn't mean God when he said that. A redeemer is someone that comes and takes care of your household when you are gone. So I think David saw himself as a redeemer for Bathsheba, because Uriah was gone. And when he came back, he had to, you know, quickly get rid of him. But also, when we speak about how it falls into the categories of violence against women, I think it also goes into that issue of women being disposable, with no agency, with no autonomy, so she cannot choose for herself. But David made that decision for her.
Reverend, it's only left us. I must also apologize. Muruti aka o bona re ke wena, Muruti Sithoto ke no re godisa mang, so my apologies for that. Colleagues, we have an opportunity to learn, we have an opportunity to ask questions, and we're just all quiet. Go botsisa a se bothata, go nyoko tseba. So ke gopela let us ask questions. Muruti, you back? Muruti Dichwen, oh, you back? Oh, hi. Any comment, students? We still have more time, Minyana. Focus, you are a student of therapy, and there's no way what Dr. Lerato has said. Obviously, it provokes you a lot. Can you just maybe get a comment or a question on a presentation, please?
Mokoena, please take down your video. Your signal is not strong to handle both. We are losing you in terms of voice, so we can only render voice, not video. Thanks.
Oh, thank you for that, Marachidi. Thank you. Focusy, can you just comment or ask a question? Because I know that presentation somehow triggered certain things.
Good morning, everyone. Kina I'm not feeling well, but I think I will just say some few words. From my side, I really appreciate the presentation. It indeed provoked a lot of thoughts. And one would also think of stories of Gomorrah and Sodoma. But I think my question will then go there to say, Doc, when it comes to that, a lot of people misinterpret, or maybe I'm wrong to say misinterpret, but they interpret it as one of the story that clearly affirms that God did. Kina? All right. It clearly affirms that it's a story that addresses homosexuality and affirms that God was against that. So I'm just thinking that, can you maybe just give us some clarity upon the content or the main reason or the story behind Sodoma le Sodoma? Because a lot of people indicated in that manner when they want to argue homosexuality, especially in the context of the church. So we all know that homosexuality is one of the burning topics, both in the society and the church. So I thought maybe one would ask, is it still relevant for people to use that particular scripture? Because from where I'm sitting, I know that one cannot argue homosexuality from the context of the Bible. So I just wanted to get some clarity from you in that regard. Thank you very much.
Before Dr. L answer, can Lucky Kunene please mute your mic? I've sent you a message directly. Please mute your mic. Lucky Kunene.
Oh, thank you for that, Marachidi. Gianni, I'm seeing your hand. Reverend Situtu, you will speak after Mrs. Rachidi in that order. Gianni, Marachidi, then Muruti Situtu. And then Dr. Lerato will respond to all questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mokoena, for the illuminating presentation. So in your presentation, you mentioned like physical proximity, but we are now working mostly online, and women still are emotionally battered. So what sort of observations are you making in terms of sort of emotional abuse, violence through social media and in the digital world?
Gianni?
Can I ask again, or can I come through? Or
Oh yeah, please, in that sequence after when I Muruti Situtu.
Thanks, Dr. L. For me, it's I'd like to thank you so much for a very thorough and thought-provoking, actually unsettling presentation, because that really seeks to unsettle us, those who are reading the Bible, so that we can be able to see such loopholes and highlight them, and they need to ring a bell for many of us who are going through the study of God and its history and all of that, right? Mine is just, especially where I got interested, is where you were very clear in explaining the two types of violence, where we always put violence against women in a blanket of gender-based violence. And I applaud you for that, that it has to stand out. There is violence against women, there's violence against children, and there's gender-based violence. And of which now I just want to hear your thoughts. As you rightfully say that when we are so afflicted as women that even now with the current situation, with the Somizi and the spouse going on, right? That can also be classified as domestic violence, but we are so mum on that. And it could be the fact that Black on Black violence against women, especially Black men, have been so violent, has been so against women, that it creates a challenge for us to even stand with another Black man when they have been afflicted in such a way. Yes, it's a domestic violence, but it's also violence that can also, that domestic violence that we are also experiencing as women. But I think maybe it could be a question or a comment, but I just want to hear your input on that, because for me, it becomes a very great challenge, like I rightfully said, that because men have been so tormenting Black women that it becomes so difficult for us to come together and help each other, to comfort one another, and to come up with a way forward, because we have become enemies against each other as opposed to being together. As you rightfully say that, you know, when Black and white women have to come to the table, there's a level of privilege that makes a Black woman not be comfortable to be associated fully or to relate fully with a white woman, because when all of those are being addressed, when the challenges that Black women and white women face have been addressed, white women becomes the superior, even though we came together in the table, as well as now you are trying to sympathize with the Somisis and the Mohale issue. But when all of this gets solved as a domestic violent issue, men still are becoming superior over women in terms of when that privilege or when whatever that violence is being addressed, always men come out as superior. Women still become dominant to men. So it becomes a challenge when the two genders have to come together to the table and solve, because of that superiority and inferiority that is always placed at the level of our gender. Thanks.
Reverend Tutu.
Okay, thank you so much, Kia. Nalo, one question, and then the other one is just a request for maybe Dr. Mokoena, just to can elaborate on the last point that she was made. She made on what is it? Decentralized. Yes, she used the concept decentralized, and I missed a bit of it there. Now, the question that I have is, she will correct me if I did not get that correct. Are you saying white women has a different perception on gender-based violence than Black women? That's the question. Thank you.
Thank you. My arm is my arm is really sore. But to attend to the first question and to Muruti focus, I'm not a trained scholar in Pentateuchal studies. It would be disingenuous of me to even want to provide an answer to a question that I myself am not here on. But rightfully so, as you say, we cannot argue homosexuality from the Bible. And even the things that are, described in the text that we read, it's just sex, men having sex with other men. There's no such thing as homosexual sex, it's sex. But I think I will hold it there because I'm also new. We have a new trend in biblical studies now. We call it queer biblical interpretation. And I am slowly just, getting into it, trying to find my way around it and read about it. So hopefully in the near future, we can be able to, have a proper and thorough conversation. But for now, I cannot provide you with a direct answer. And I hope I get it. The second question was, from Mama Shokine.
Yes.
Okay. When we about queer violence, I think we generally we operate in hierarchies, and there's a hierarchy of which bodies matter. There's a hierarchy of how we ascribe value, axiological importance. So I think even before we say that it's difficult to sympathize with Somizi and Mohale, I think we should be able to note our privilege as cisgender heterosexual Black men and women and say that we know that for a while, we do not recognize queer bodies. We are not interested in their lives. That should be our fundamental point of departure, to say that we have a certain level of proximity which is far removed from queer lives and queer experiences. This is why we cannot relate and even have an input on when queer violence happens in the domestic space. So it's multi-layered. It's queer violence, it's domestic violence, it's intimate partner violence. And so I think firstly, we should acknowledge that we have that privilege. And secondly, we don't recognize the humanity of queer people, whether men or women. And I think there are no immediate interlinks between the cisgender heterosexual community and queer or gender non-conforming community or persons. There's no immediate links that can help us to be able to discern certain things, to be able to sympathize with them. But also at the same time, and I think this is going to boil over into the question Muruti after Mama Shoki, white women. So that's why there's a hierarchy, and queer people are at the bottom. There's white men, there's white women, there's black men, there's black women, and then there's queer people. So they are at the bottom of this chain, of this hierarchy, and they're the most vulnerable. But at the same time, they have, okay, I'm not going to make that statement. I'm not going to. But yeah, no, I can't. But at the same time, I wanted to say that it's also difficult to sympathize with Black men sometimes, because Black men think that they're incapable of sexism, and because they want to leave everything at the feet of racism. And Bell Hooks writes about this in her book, We Are Cool, about how Black men like to run away from the culpability of sexism. And as a result, and I mean, look at the rate they kill each other at, and there's a bigger, greater culture that, fuels this violence, these violent acts that they commit. So we have been pitted against each other, but I think the more these conversations happen, the more we can come together and realize that we are actually fighting a common enemy, because ultimately what we want is to live in a non-violent society. And now to go to the question, Muruti, there are, like I said, there is white men, white women, Black men, and Black women. And as a result, we can all come together and say, okay, we recognize that we have certain challenges, we can share in these challenges, and they affect us. But geopolitics, for instance, this is why you find in biblical feminist interpretation and womenism, the strand, you find that they are far removed from that feminism that comes from the superpower, which is America, because now we have geopolitics. Women in America can cry, but at the same time, they benefit from our imperialism in Africa. So the same with white women. These are dynamics of power that are at play in every sphere that we find ourselves in. So white women benefit from the violence, the general violence that we go through, both Black men and women. Although they can say that they're only, Stuart Hall in his book, Formations of Modernity, speaks about it. The only difference for white women is just that their husbands are no longer their bosses, they have the new boss at work. Otherwise, everything else is business as usual for them. And also, when you look at how the trends of feminism and the waves, developed, the first wave, second wave, and third wave, and when you look at how even into Latin American women could not relate to African American women, could not relate to white women, even in the States. So it's quite, there's an asymmetry, and we cannot come together. I think that was it. I think that was it.
Okay, Kuala.
Please.
Okay, Kuala. Thank you so much, Dr. L. Thank you so much, Ralevoa. Babu Tutu, Lerato, it's only one question, and then I'm just going to close it. Is it okay?
No problem. No problem.
Babu Tutu, please take it. I need to close it by 15:15.
No, Chairperson, let me not bother you now that we see that Madam is under the pain. Otherwise, I was going to ask about the church, the Christian perspective, in terms of seeing that the pastors are always accused of these things on a daily basis. And I was also going to cite the plight we are in here, even here in Eastern Cape, where a young girl has been mutilated into pieces and put on the street. How do we encounter or do we approach such bad behaviors as the Christians, as the Christian parody? I thank you, Ben Jefferson.
All right. Yeah, you know, to introduce Christianity into the equation is something else as well. But we know that office bearers have a tendency of abusing power, and this system of unbalanced, unequal distributions of power also exists. The Christian faith, the Christian religion, in itself, like I said earlier on, you know, the idea of monotheism, in itself, Christianity is an othering religion. So it makes no sense for us to expect anything other than that. And we are still also battling with internal conflicts of how we read gendered texts, of how we read violent texts, of how we read texts that imply class divisions, texts that are discriminatory in nature. And it is from that point, because once we change, someone once said that interpretation is all we have. Once we change because even when you look at doctrines, they come from interpretations of texts. Once we change how we approach texts, then I think we have a good start. We have a good head start. We can get somewhere, you know, because these texts operate, you know, in a cultural paradigm as well. And they influence a certain culture. In my recent article that was published on Jezebel and Mrs. Job, I talk about how these texts influence culture and how they operate in a cultural paradigm and how they influence interpretations, how they influence which bodies are seen, which bodies matter. And Christianity, I mean, you know, same as humanism, we have a legacy of violence. And that's why I'm saying this one deserves a whole day, a full day where we demarcate clearly how did we get here in terms of how we begin to look at how our religions in themselves help us fashion violence. And when you look at this case, Yaga uAlutha igama lakhe angithi lo bulala inkazana, he cut up her body into pieces, you know, but her body was a crime scene. You are reminded of you are reminded of many instances where, you know, intimate partner violence, you know, espouses itself in many ways where you cannot even begin to comprehend. I saw an article, but you know, yeah, I saw an article the other day where, you know, her death was reduced to financial exclusion from the university to say that she had to live with the boyfriend because she was a victim of underfunding. Okay. So what are we saying about this man who went Ankasaha, Asea Musadio, Ampore? How do we account for that? That's another thing. But Kinalemang says my time is over and I'm so glad. I'm going back to bed. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lerato. Before you leave, can I quickly ask student Maratawatu just to say thank you to Dr. Lerato for her time. And yes, student Maratawatu, ke kopa o lebohe Dr. Mokoena. Is he there?
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
I am. Thank you so much. Good morning, colleagues, friends, and Baruti. I want to appreciate and send a gratitude to Dr. Mokoena for you to make time and to come and have that kind of a presentation to the students of NTS. We really want to appreciate you, and may God bless you and bless you and bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Muratabatu. Dr. L, thank you so much for your time and everything. Muruti, Reverend Maketa, I know you are very much ready, but can we go maybe for a 10 or 15 minutes tea in our comfort homes, comfort places, and then Kikupaka 25 past, Kaufela Runa, we must just log in, and then we give Muruti time to proceed with the presentation. Thank you so much. Enjoy your tea.
Thank you.